Hello, beautifuls. You're listening to Bliss and Grit. I'm Brooke Thomas. I'll be joined soon by my dear friend and co-host, Vanessa Scotto. On the show, we're talking about being on the embodied spiritual path, and what does that actually mean? What is a real evolution of our lives? How do we ultimately embrace everything, all the beauty and crazy, the joys and the messes, the bliss and the grit that is a human life? We attempt to sort it out for ourselves on the show. In today's episode, we're talking about a snippet of Eckhart Tolle's book, A New Earth, that kind of caught my attention when I was giving it a listen recently this year. He says that if we approach everything in life with either one of these three, acceptance, enjoyment, or enthusiasm, then we will essentially not be suffering. And we will be here in the present moment. Now, I usually hate things that feel like a blueprint to a happy life. However, this one's got some good bones. And also, Eckhart Tolle is just a very sincere and clear and grounded, beautiful teacher. So Vanessa and I dive into the nuance of what we think exploring this way of being means. If you're enjoying the show, we would be thrilled if you could leave a review for us on iTunes or on our Facebook page, which is Bliss and Grit. And you can also go over to the website, blissandgrit.com, to subscribe and hear updates about upcoming events that we might have coming up. We do have something coming up, kicking off mid to late June. So get on the list if you want all the details. We're just about ready to unveil that. And the last thing before we head into the conversation, we curse like sailors. So if there are kids around, you might want to be wearing the headphones. Okay, here we go. Hello, Vanessa.
Hello, darling.
So I just want to clear the air first for us more than for anyone listening. We're having a very Mercury retrograde kind of day. So you can roll your eyes at the astrological bullshit as much as you want, but it's like multiple locations and construction outside and internet fails. And so we'll see how this goes. We'll give it our best shot. Yeah, we'll see. So I would like to talk about this year. Recently, I listened to A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle, and I had given that a read a while back, so I was kind of like revisiting. I love his work. I find him to be a very clear teacher and a very sincere teacher. And there was this moment right at the very end of the book where he got a little bit blueprinty, like, which you wouldn't expect from him. He's not one of these kind of, here's the blueprint to live an amazing life types, but he actually broke down these 3 bullet points of, if you're living from these places, you're living a life that's free of suffering. And so I was like, oh, you have my attention, and I find them fascinating. I'm going to say what they are soon, I promise. But I also as I play with them, because of course it's something to lean into and explore, I find it's really true. And of course it's they're very simple and yet not the easiest either, because it goes contrary to most of our conditioning. So the 3 things that he said, if you can approach any situation in your life with one of these 3 things: first, acceptance; the other option, enjoyment; and the third option, enthusiasm. So the way he defines acceptance, and we can get into this a little bit too, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, I'm going on my memory of the book. I don't have it in front of me. Acceptance is, of course, we have situations as human beings in our life that are not the dream desired thing we would choose in the moment. The example he gives in the book is if you're driving and you get a flat tire. Now, you don't want to have a flat tire. You want to get where you were going to, but you have a flat tire. So this is a situation that you can meet with acceptance instead of spiraling off into all the storylines about why it shouldn't be happening and you're going to be late and I can't believe and did I let AAA lapse and blah, blah, blah. It's literally just, this is what's arising in this moment. So, okay, so what's the next step? Pull on the shoulder of the road. Okay, what's the next moment of acceptance? Call AAA. What's the next one? All these things. So acceptance is option 1, not because these come in order, but based on whatever shows up. Enjoyment, he talks about as what it is, but this very simple thing of just delighting in what you're doing. You're just doing it because it's quite simply enjoyable. So the way I think about, my son at night is a big drawer that he loves to just make drawings. He's just not doing it because there's any assignment due. He's not doing it because he's building his portfolio. He's just drawing because he enjoys drawing. And the third is enthusiasm, which he differentiates from enjoyment by saying that it has this very powerful and clear momentum. And I believe the example he gave in the book was like of archery. So this moment where you are pulling the bow, and if you shoot the arrow in a way where it's like just right, and it's singing through the air and it's heading for the bullseye, and you can feel how you like got it just right. Like that arrow moving through the air has this graceful, easeful momentum all on its own. So in some ways, I think he's talking a little bit about a flow state, and he talks about it in relationship to like basically letting your life's gifts come through you as easily as possible. So I think that that's really fascinating, you know, thinking about, well, okay, like let's take it at face value. What if we try or lean into approaching all life situations with one of these three options? Like, how does that go? First of all, we're going to do it imperfectly because we're not enlightened beings. So
just accept that shit.
Right, exactly. It's not going to be like, oh, okay, I know I did that for a full 24 hours. No, like that's not going to happen. It's going to be quite a lot of noticing how much we don't do that, and how often we're picking other things out of the bag of possibilities. So let's talk about those goodies a little bit.
You know, it's very confusing since we started this episode once and got interrupted. and then some of the shit I was saying, you added into the intro.
I
so
did.
I'm like, now what am I going to talk about?
Well, dribbled into my brain.
I think that we can. I think what helps is to start to look at each component, right? And I don't know, acceptance stands out to me to be a really interesting one. And we'd begun a conversation on acceptance in the Fuck Spiritual Shame episode.
So glad
I literally can't
chose
say that
classy
out loud.
title. I know. We're high class.
We're infants.
Yeah.
So there's this thing around like, okay, I think we can clarify what acceptance means, right? Because into my head comes a couple of things. One, like, well, why should I accept what's unacceptable? There's certain things that arise in the world that I don't want to accept, right? I want to stand up against, like certain kinds of treatment, for example. Like maybe I'm walking down the street. This just came up for me yesterday when I was talking to Judith Blackstone. Like walking down the street in the summer in New York City elicits a lot of uncomfortable male attention. And so let's say I'm walking down the street and someone catcalls me in a way that I find very disgusting. So when you use the word acceptance, the first thing that pops into my head is like, okay, so warm bow to the guy who's catcalling, and I don't have any problems with this. This is all just life, right? Like, okay, I have to accept this. And I think that's where that word itself can start to run into problems. So do you want to take a stab at saying what you think acceptance would look like in that moment?
In that moment, I mean, so if we think about it just in terms of staying inside of ourselves, right? It's not about how I need to feel towards the guy. Inside myself, the things I would need to accept are things like anger and feeling vulnerable in the world and feeling like an object in the world and how uncomfortable that makes me feel. So it's more like in that example, it would be accepting the things that come to the surface that feel uncomfortable, which we have very quick habits about hiding and cloaking and suppressing. And of course, one of those cloaks would be things like warm spiritual bow to the guy who just said this string of disgusting things to me. He's God's child too, you know? And it's like, that's true, but it doesn't mean it's not disgusting. Right. It doesn't mean it doesn't make me filled with rage. It brings up all kinds of feelings of feeling unsafe. It hits on triggers about feeling like we're in a culture that does not have the backs of women and that keeps abandoning them more and more and what that feels like. So those things would, for me personally, arise. And so then I have to, the warm bow, not the fake spiritual person bow, the loving bow would be towards those things inside myself. Like, yes, these feelings are arising. And I think that just generally, yes, and revisit fuck spiritual shame for a lot of this, but we think that to be a good person is to be a person who is walked on. Like, it has this feeling in the body of, well, it's very suppressive. It's very still. It's almost like a swallowing something down, like a holding your throat and your jaw tight. For me, the feeling of like, of accepting something that's actually unacceptable, or playing a role of being the person who's just cool with everything because I'm spiritual. It has this real, almost self-annihilating feeling, because I'm not being honest with myself about what I'm actually feeling in that moment. Whereas real acceptance is just very, very sweet and loving. And certainly our mentor, Kieran Trace, does a very good job of distinguishing real acceptance versus fake acceptance. And she talks about it as, one of the words she uses a lot is warm, that it's just very, very warm. And I think about it in terms of like warm in the way that like I snuggle my dog, warm in the way that I kiss my son goodnight, like that kind of level of like just really warm. So in that example of uncomfortable cat calls, it would be that level of like, oh, sweetie, I love you so much, towards the, I don't feel safe in the world, I'm angry, all that stuff.
I'm disgusted. I had a friend of mine the other day, and he was telling me that something had happened to him. It was something like really stressful, really uncomfortable, but he lives a pretty blessed and privileged life, generally speaking, as most people who are listening to this do, not all. So when he was complaining to someone, they sort of retorted with like, you should be grateful, and like exactly the thing we were talking about on Fuck Spiritual Shame. And it's like these kinds of platitudes. Mm-hmm. And that's why I like these three things that Eckhart kind of broke down, because all that really does for the person on the receiving end is really immediately create shame.
Yes.
Like, you shouldn't have the feelings you have. You shouldn't have the thoughts you have. Now, if that worked, if saying to someone, oh, Brooke, you should be really grateful because you're quite a blessed person. If that worked.
Right. And suddenly I felt blessed.
Instantaneously,
genuinely felt it.
Well, then that's wonderful. And maybe sometimes when certain spiritual teachers say that to their students, it does, because perhaps if Muji's saying it, it carries a transmission of energy, and all of a sudden someone in that moment recognizes a new aspect of their experience. But by and large, what happens with these kinds of platitudes is we move into what you said, like swallowing, repression, shame, conditioning. And so it becomes this further contortion.
Yes.
Like, oh, I must not feel this. I don't have to feel that. And that's where like there's real nuance to understanding the process of self-recovery. Mm-hmm. As I think so my friend Shannon Thomas calls it Thompson. Damn. Always
that's
mix
okay.
That up.
I'm Thomas, that. So it gets confusing.
She calls her stuff spiritual recovery, and it's like self-recovery, and I think there's that level of nuance. So what I like about moving to acceptance is like not how it should arise, so that when someone catcalls you, I could say, well, Brooke, you should feel flattered. I mean, you should feel
right.
Beautiful. You should feel at one. You should feel compassionate, because that's just someone who's stuck in their thing.
Yeah.
I can give you a lot of shoulds. As soon as we get to that level of should, we've created a constriction within ourselves.
Yeah.
We've had to do something to become something, which is half the problem, since we think we have to be something,
right,
quote unquote.
It's maybe all the problem. I don't know.
I think
but it's pretty significant.
I think it might be. I'm thinking the same thing. But I'm all obsessed with the objectification tip right now, but I'm thinking it might be. And anyway, so instead, to be able to meet it with acceptance, not as in this situation is welcome. I love that this man is catcalling me. I have zero emotions or negative feelings about this, but that rather it's, oh, and this too.
Yes.
Okay, so now this is arising. So the man does this and that arises. And then within me, what arises in response is. And then that arose. And okay, I can accept that and I can meet that with acceptance as well.
Yeah.
And then now I want to keep walking faster, or I want to say something back, or I want to whatever. And now that's arising.
Yeah.
And so it's this much more nuance of not stamping something as okay, or not trying to make something positive that doesn't feel positive, but this more genuine, like micro moment to micro moment, accepting of the spontaneous arising of human experience. Does that sound right?
Absolutely. And what you're describing is this process of you're staying in touch with yourself in a very alive and moment to moment way. Because as soon as you're shoulding, it's based on all kinds of stories about the past and the future and the way things ought to be. But if, like what you were describing, and now my throat feels tight, and now my face feels hot and red, and now I feel anger, and now you're in this very welcoming relationship to yourself, because you're basically just saying, yes, like if you were talking to a young child, like, yes, sweetie, tell me, you know, what is, tell me, say yes more, like what else? And not in this way where you're, you know, throwing kerosene on it and turning it into an identity, because people can do that too. Like, and now I'm the pissed off bitch who, like, don't mess with me. And, you know, that's not in the moment either, because, and then you might, you know, notice on the wave after anger is this wave of grief, and then this wave of sleepy, and then, you know, who knows, but you're staying more in touch in a present moment way.
Well, what if we were to look at something that feels like even more unacceptable? Like we were to look at like Donald Trump, or
you
like,
feel like going for something a little
yeah,
owie today?
But yeah, because well, what happens is this, like we say these things and then people are like, but really, how do you do that in action? You know, like then that's what the messages we get back is like, yeah, it's all well and good. These are really nice ideas and they even make sense. Yeah. But I think it's good to give examples, because then there's things that feel even more like, wait, but I don't accept that. I can't accept that about life. So let's just talk about it. Like, so, okay, let's just get political.
I can see you're feeling it a little. It's okay. You usually don't get owie around political things as much as I do, but it's a different time.
It's so hot topic. It's like, it feels so unacceptable to people, you know, to certain people. And if the converse was true and Hillary Clinton was president, that would feel unacceptable to a very big group of people, right? This was a very polarizing place, and to whoever is responding, it can feel unacceptable. So let's say your leader, that be, is an unacceptable thing to you. You're not going to meet it with enjoyment, and you're not going to meet it with enthusiasm, really.
Right.
How do you meet that with acceptance? What would that look like?
For me personally, because I can't say it's about anyone else. Yeah. I mean, it's a few things. Like, first of all, one of the things I keep having to come up against when something goes wrong and I'm grieving what feels like the loss of my country, you know, grieving the loss of democracy for me, is if it's about him and I'm like out there, the problem, I have to notice that he's not in the room with me. And that while he is affecting culture, that so am I. You know what I mean? Like there's a certain way of, I have to get clear on the power stuff and the way that we energetically inflate certain things. So he's energetically inflated. Like that's the way his persona is, and happens to be the most powerful person, arguably, on the planet. Putin maybe is more powerful, but it's close. Crap, I'm so mad at you for taking this into a political place. So what I'll notice, like, let's say, okay, so he just fired Comey, and it's like, oh my God, we do not live in a democracy. So I have to notice the, oh my God, we don't live in a democracy. And then I'll notice myself watching Pain Body TV, which is Facebook for me, and I'm obsessively doing that. And I'm reading the articles and I'm wondering who's saying what. And I'm wondering, like, where is the call for sanity on both sides of the aisle? Just people, like, aren't there enough people in our government who love democracy that they care about that more? Like, isn't it just democracy? It doesn't matter if you want him to be president or not. Yeah, I know. Like, isn't there like an instantaneous move towards, like, we actually have a constitution in place or whatever? So I noticed myself doing that. And that's a way for me to stay hooked in the narrative, right? There's no problem with it. It's fine. But it's really good for me to notice that I'm doing it because autopilot happens right quick. And I'm doing it to avoid feeling what I'm feeling, actually. Not just to throw kerosene on things, but it's a cloaking mechanism because it's the opposite of sitting with what's actually arising. And I would say, that for me, and we'll see where it goes because who knows, but in the present moment, when I sit with what's arising, it's helping me to unravel a lot of my own personal conditioning because, of course, it's not just about this person I've never met way over there doing these things. It's about how it tugs on me individually. And as those things unravel, there are more opportunities that show up for me that are in alignment, like with the way I can live my life, which is totally different than just I was going to say numbing out, but it's more like raging out on flipping through. Yeah, flipping through all the articles. So it's not an ignoring, like it's going to be fine or, everything has its moment or so I'm not bright siding it, but I'm noticing like, okay, this is my pain body in action. Like this is my predilection is to do it this way. And if I actually sit with the pain, it's just a completely different experience. And it's a much more useful, it actually becomes fruitful.
Mm-hmm. And by sitting with the pain, we could use the word accepting.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So you're meeting with acceptance that pain arises. Yeah. I mean, I think part of why I looked at like the political level of it is that it feels important to differentiate between acceptance and passivism.
Yes. Right.
Right. That no matter what the circumstance you're dealing with, where I just use this as one example because a lot of people are relating to this right now and it feels big and it feels like something people have to take action on. It's like, okay, so if there's a guy catcalling me on the street, that's very annoying. It's very disgusting. I actually personally, I am one who wants to take action on those things. But at the same time, I could really gather perspective and say, what is that really going to do? Mm-hmm. Right? Like there's no real problem here. It's not going to change the world. And it's very easy to just move into a passive stance on it. When you get to these bigger topics, it starts to pull out the conversation around passivity and acceptance, I think, more clearly. Mm-hmm. So that to accept something is not an external action, right? So this is what you were saying prior. It's like we don't have to accept external circumstances as in stamp of approval. I agree with you. I'm so happy you're happening.
Yeah. Or it's all going to be okay in the end.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And we don't have to accept it as in, so I do nothing about it. Mm-hmm. So here I am and you all are reacting and I'm just in acceptance. Om Shanti Shanti. I'm all love and everything's happening around me, but the world's an illusion. Because that's the next level at which people could interpret the concept of acceptance.
Yeah.
But rather, it's like, in part, it's accepting a fact, like a reality. So, for example, like he is in fact president. That's a reality. Mm-hmm. A certain percentage of people voted this way. That's a reality. Yeah. Other people voted other ways. That's a reality. There are multiple belief systems on this. That's a reality. So we're not contorting anything.
Yeah.
We're not jumping into that land where you and I had talked earlier when we talked about political stuff about how easy it is to make everyone bad who voted for him.
Yes, right.
And everyone good. And that's all not true.
Yeah. And we're just watching like the shame demon put its tentacles everywhere, everyone on every side. It's been really fascinating for me to watch. Like, woo, we're finding fresh ways to shame fire hose people all over the place on every side of every debate.
Which isn't acceptance.
No.
That's all categorizing reality to make it feel safer to you.
Right.
Whether it's creating your identity, as you said, well, I'm this bitch who's going to rebel and not take shit. And now that makes me feel comfortable. And as the bitch, I'm going to like judge other people, and I'm going to do a divisive I and you. And that's how I find safety. So I'm going to move that way. And that's not actually an acceptance internally.
Yeah.
That's not an internal recognition of what's arising. It's also not an internal recognition of what's arising to be like, some people are good and some people are bad. And like, this is the biggest disaster that's ever happened in history. And like all of these different ways, or everything's just okay. Right. Also, it's like, how do we sit with reality, which is probably where acceptance is so hard. In fact, like, so masterful.
It's about not arguing with reality. It's just meeting it. And that's going to be individual, of course. You know, for me, it's like, what are the really, really, really sore spots, in me about this person's presidency? And it's all related to just pushing on these very, very, very tender, very old places about sociopaths, abusive power, women being non-people. You know, I could go on and on. These are things that are personal to me, and they're personal to some other people too. But it's like, it's only useful if I can feel it pushing on my very, very tender, wounded flesh that goes back many years. And then I can love it, right? See it. And none of this shit is as tidy as it sounds. You know, it's like, it's a constant unfolding and a sitting with, and like, and a loving, not sitting with, like sitting on, and not sitting with like fondling the cathartic feelings, but just to literally like, oh God, that's really okay. And then it can move sometimes. And it's like a relief floods through. And then sometimes I have a much harder time and I don't get to relief, and I'll spend days or weeks not with relief, you know, and then it moves. So it's like, it's just, I think that's one of the things about being human when you're in, you know, when you're talking about being in a particularly uncomfortable situation, whether it's about large scale things like who's in power, or things in your personal life, you know, terrible diagnoses, or the loss of a loved one, or they're taking your house, you know, all these things that we think about as being very, very hard human experiences. We're all going to meet them in these very individual ways and imperfectly, because we're humans.
There is this, I have so much to say on this topic of acceptance, so won't overdo the topic, but like, there was this article I was reading, someone shared this morning, and it was about dying, and they were talking about the number of medications that people take in the last 6 months of their lives. And also how most people wind up like in hospice or hospital care, even though if you ask people, that's not where they want to be. That's not where they want to die. And they were saying that really the biggest problem that they noticed is lack of conversation around death and lack of palliative care. And that if you brought those in, actually the percentage of drugs and the number of times they have to be in a hospice or hospital greatly goes down. And it just got me thinking about like those levels of accepting, like meeting life as it is, that when we don't, there's like this contortion, right? So if I can't accept that I might die or that my loved one might die, I can't have that conversation. And if I can't have that conversation, then we have to be in agreement that we're going to fight to live in this certain way.
Yeah.
And then that creates its own movement, and then another movement. And
it's excessive suffering all around.
Yeah. And it's not to go into the passivity of like, oh, ho hum, there's nothing we can do. It's like, it's just accepting the reality of the different things that might arise in any moment. So like completely diversely off topic, the other arena I was thinking of was like when someone cheats on you. So, for example, we've seen this where someone cheats on you. I'm going to talk about it as a man, but women do it too. You beautiful men, we're not marginalizing you or we're judging you. But I'm just going to talk about a man because it's my personal experience. So it's like when you notice that someone cheats on you, maybe your boyfriend, and then sometimes you'll see women get mad at the woman, but not at the man.
It's like the safe position to take. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's this safe position, and it's this non-acceptance of all of the variables that came together to create something, which are many. right? And we don't have to sit in judgment to sit in acceptance. It's like, oh, there are all these variables that arise that created this scenario, this movement. You know, even if we got back to politics, it's like some people find it useful to talk about like, well, this all arose out of the collective. So it could be useful to just accept like, well, what part do I play in this, if any? You know, and just look at that and hold that in acceptance, that everything is kind of arising out of these co-conditions. And we don't have to push them away. We don't have to judge them. We don't have to simply solve them and put them into a box. It's like what we're looking for is this experience of truth. And you said before relief. And I was thinking like, yes, I've worked with clients and myself long enough to know that even when people get quote unquote hard truths, there is this immediate experience of peace and relief.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the kind of like zing of reality. Like if you want to know, am I in this acceptance that Eckhart Tolle is talking about? At least for me, the closest I've come to it is this like kind of relief and like, okay, well, here's what's up.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not a judgment. It's not a good or bad. It's not a, this can't be up. This person can't be my president. My boyfriend can't have cheated on me. My girlfriend can't have done this. This person can't be dying. It's not a pushing away. It's just a, oh, here's what's up.
Yeah.
And there's this way that you kind of really settle when you get the resonance of truth.
Yeah, it's relief. I mean, we've talked about it and we will always re-talk about this because this is the crux of the thing, right? But we've talked about it using Martha Beck's term, clench, unclench, Kieran Trace's term, delicious yes, which is the relief, the like clarity movement. And it's profound. And I do think that like for everyone listening, you can probably think of a time in your life when you finally faced something you had maybe been avoiding and it was relieving, you know, something about, you know, the big things that are hard for us to deal with, health, home, money, relationships, like one of those things that had been really on the little hamster wheel running away from and going nowhere. And then finally you were like, I'm going to get off the wheel because I'm going to really accept what the truth is here. And that is very relieving. That's acceptance.
That's acceptance. And once you accept, that's the funny thing. Once you're like sitting with truth, all of a sudden new creative possibilities arise.
Yes, right. Because you're not telling yourself a story about the little tight walls that are in around you. And you're like, oh, okay. You know, there are all these options.
Right. And it invites a different movement. And I think what we can notice from me, like bludgeoning through these examples, was that like what I was trying to get at is when we move from non-acceptance, we could call it fear, we can call it resistance, but when we move from non-acceptance, it creates like a little distortion. And then that distortion tends to create the next distortion and the next distortion. But when we move from this place of at ease or acceptance or reality or truth, there's this like clarity in the movement that tends to create a little more freedom, actually. And then that creates a movement that's born from a little more freedom. So then that tends to invite something forward that has a little more freedom in it and a little more ease in it. And so, yeah, I don't know.
Yes, acceptance.
Does that make
no,
sense?
You're not.
Motherfucker. You know what I'm saying?
So enjoyment.
Yeah.
Enjoyment is, I don't know, in many ways, I feel like it's the simplest thing, but it's also something we don't do that much. Like I even, because I'm a body person, I'm fascinated how we've turned one of the most enjoyable things in the world, which is moving our bodies, into like, the worst. You know, like everyone has turned it into, first of all, fitness. So it's this thing that has a separate category. It's not just being in your body and moving around in the world. And then second of all, fitness has got this totally self-abusive movement, you know, where it's like, first of all, you're doing it to get to some future tense goal about how you're going to be. And then you're doing it in this way that obviously not everyone, but I think if we can talk about a cultural trend, there's a cultural trend towards harming yourself in the name of health. And it's just bonkers to me. I'm like, can we all stop pretending that like doing 4 Ironmans a year is a health choice you're making. It's not a health choice. It's compulsive behavior, you know? And, or like Biggest Loser, which I could complain about forever, that stupid, awful TV show, is such a like snapshot of where we are culturally about bodies. You know, moving, being in your body is like one of the most pleasurable things in the world. And if you do it in an embodied way, meaning you're making contact with yourself instead of just doing your grocery list or shaming yourself about your thighs while you do box steps or whatever, you experience that it's this like really, really, really delicious thing. And then your body gives you information like, today I'm tired. I'm done with the hike at this point. And then the next day it's like, sprint now, jump, feels so good, but not this like punitive thing. So enjoyment is really straightforward, and yet we're not so loving it in many ways. Like we talk about this before in other episodes too, where we can be driven towards happiness as a future tense goal. That's really different than enjoyment, which has to happen now. And of course, Eckhart Tolle is the author of The Power of Now, but it's great that he came up with these words, that really land you in what's happening in the moment. You know, enjoyment is something that arises naturally in the moment when you're doing something enjoyable. And you keep following the thread of, is it enjoyable? Is it enjoyable? Do I still like it? Do I still want to make this drawing or walk on this trail or have coffee with this friend or whatever?
Mm-hmm. Well, we also did record an episode on the fear of joy. So there's those things. But since lately, I'm mostly on the rant of objectification.
You're like, I'm going to bring it on around to that.
Just going to keep talking about that shit because that's what's up for me. Because I feel like, okay, well, what you were talking about, let's say with exercise, you know, how moving your body is this very natural, delicious thing. We see it cross-culturally. Like, for example, globally, cross-culturally, people dance.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right? And they dance for spiritual reasons and they dance for exercise reasons, but they dance for really pleasure, like for joy. They dance because they can't help but dance, right? Like it's like you're alive and you dance. Like that's why humans dance. We move. So I was thinking about that. And then I was thinking about this idea that we can make even that such a thing. Like, well, I have to dance well and I have to look good and I have to, you know, get to the gym and I have to be fit and all these things. And I'm starting to think about it's like this self-objectification.
Yes, it is.
I mean, a lot of what we're getting at, even with the shame episode and this episode, is like, just quit thinking you have to be anyway and just be the way you are and like, let that be okay. Mm-hmm. And that's a really apparently very hard thing for us to do.
That is, yes, master's level stuff for sure.
It's crazy.
Constantly unfolding. It's like, and now here's another layer of how I wasn't letting me be really, truly myself. Oh, look. Oh, wait, there's only 40 million more.
It's like, okay, so what would sexy be? And then we think about like, what would sexy be? And then I'll just try to be sexy. But like, that's not sexy to try to be sexy.
No, it emerges naturally. Yes.
Be the sexy you are, like whatever that is a natural rising for you. Or like, how can I be happy? Well, you can't try to be happy. You can only be happy. Like
right, exactly.
Happiness is arising for you. And God, we tie ourselves up in like pretzel knots, don't we? And it's like so easy to do. I definitely still do this. It's just like less and less than I used to. But those little ways where you still think there's something I have to be, like, how am I going to live my life with purpose? Well, you don't try to figure out how to live your life with purpose.
Right.
You just let purpose rise. Because when you get out of the way, turns out all these things, since they're a part of the dynamic human spectrum of experience, they just arise, you know, like waves or like fireflies in the sky. Like they just come and they pop and and they don't last. And then they come back again. And it's the way that it works. I'm thinking about, you know, given that we're human beings and we have conditioning and we live in a world that is chock full of other human beings with their stupid conditioning. Just kidding. Just kidding. All compassion. No, but
Deep bow.
we're human beings. Yeah. Lots of conditioning, getting triggered by other human beings with lots of conditioning. We're all just super unskillful. Most of the time, no one's meaning to do anything wrong, but there it is. And we're getting triggered, right? But that conditioning that other people have and the conditioning we're developing, ultimately, it teaches us how to be. I mean, that's what conditioning is. It's like a lesson in how to be. Be like this. Don't be like this. This is safe. This is good. Yeah. This is what happy people do. This is what spiritual people do. And so we just kind of keep heaping on these ideas about how to be, which is taking us farther away from being.
Yeah.
And then we become our own objects. We objectify ourselves as if there's some way to be that is other than the natural arising that is Vanessa-ing, and that is Brooke-ing, and, you know, all of you people out there doing your thing, right? So I think that enjoyment is this very natural state where it's not an idea about what should I enjoy. It's not an idea about, oh, well, Brooke said she enjoys, you know, chocolate. Like, let me try that. Or she likes Rick and Morty. Like, let me watch that. It's like, do not do that.
You will not like me anymore.
Do not do that. Do not do. It's really this very natural place of what bubbles is joy. And it's a moment by moment discovery. Like right now, like what would feel really joyful? What would feel like, And that's where I think Kieran's words delicious, yes, stand really strong, right? Because they're so visceral. So I do think that even knowing what can feel enjoyable can be tricky because we're so used to living as our own objects. We're so used to thinking that we can try to be a certain way or that we should do a certain thing, that to relax into, there's nowhere to be, there's nothing to do, there's no one else to try to emulate, but rather just have your delicious body, you know, come forward like the Mary Oliver poem, like let your delicious animal body.
Let the soft animal of your body love what it loves.
Boom. That's it.
Such a good line.
Enjoyment. Is like, how do you let your soft animal body love what it loves?
And here's where people go immediately in their thinking mind is, well, then I'll never get anything important done. No, I think people do this constantly.
I'll be a raging gluttonous slut.
I think people are like, well, then I'll never wash the floor. I'll never do laundry. I'll never raise my kid. But that's not true. I don't find that to be true. I've really deeply enjoyed washing dishes and cleaning the floor. And I certainly enjoy raising my child, even when stuff arises. So it's like these things co-mingle, enjoyment and acceptance co-mingle. But also sometimes it really arises that like, doing the dishes, warm water, soapy suds, moment of quiet, something is dirty, is now clean, and it's stacked on the dish thing. Like, it's just simple. It doesn't have to be, I want to go to Carnival and like have an amazing experience. It's the little things that are happening in your environment right now.
Yeah. Thich Nhat Hanh is like the master of like, exemplifying enjoyment in the moment to moment things.
Yeah.
And if you all haven't listened to Thich Nhat Hanh or read him, it's like an act of moment to moment joy just to kind of behold that.
Yeah. He transmits that, I think, really quite spectacularly.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. Great. So enthusiasm. It's enthusiasm. Now, when you described what he was saying, and in a way, it's like the most, I think, undefined, right? Like it's like an arrow singing through the air. Like we can all relate to what it's like when you're trying to fix a tire and like, okay, let me just accept this is what arises. There's no sense in being like, stupid so-and-so didn't, whatever. We can relate to that pretty easily. We all can relate to joy and not joy, whether we're good at it or struggling with it. But this sense of like the arrow singing through the air. Do you want to share what you think like enthusiasm looks like in your moment to moment? Yeah.
Well, I think that what he's pointing at is the flow state, which I haven't read it in a long time, but Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi. Huh?
Whoa!
What up? Someone can pronounce that name.
That is Wow.
I used to work for a learning nonprofit that promoted his book quite a lot. So I had to say that name to a lot of people. It's the only reason why I can pronounce it. He wrote a book called Flow. And there are lots of other people who talk about flow states. It gets a certain amount of attention these days, which is great. Although, of course, we corrupt it towards achieving superhuman goals. Ego mind gets involved. And I mean, the word that I was thinking of when I was reading him that comes from Taoism, I think, is Wu Wei, which I'm probably mispronouncing.
No, that's right.
But it's this way of, oh, thank you. It's this way that things come through you. Like if you're spacious enough, it's just unfolding. So it's enjoyable, yes, but it has this extra effortless wind at your back momentum. And it also feels to me like when I feel into it, like it has a target, not in terms of a goal, future tense that I've picked out in advance. Like I'm going to have this much percentage of body fat, or even like I'm going to be really successful at this particular kind of career. It's not that. It's more like you don't know where it's going, actually. You're the one that's on the rocket going for the ride, but it just feels extremely pleasurable to be on the rocket going for the ride. And what that looks like in an actual practical life is that you're just doing whatever the things are that naturally arise that keep letting this singing arrow through the air unfold. And it just keeps happening. And the resources and the support you need come up under your feet, and the energy you need for it, and the people you need to talk to. And I think that this is probably the least common, strangely, in our culture. I mean, I think everyone can come up with a time in their life when they feel like they were led towards something that was unfolding through them. And I think if we all kind of take a moment to think about it, we would find those little things. But it's interesting, right? Because we're such a goal-oriented culture, and I don't think we have that experience that much. It's because we're so busy contorting our goals and like forcing ourselves, puppeteering ourselves to do the thing we've picked out in advance that we're going to do. But if it's something that is mission-led or heart work, it has a totally different quality. It's like it does itself.
Does Eckhart actually talk about like the synchronicities that could arise when you're in that state, or is that you just adding that? Because
I don't remember. That's me adding it, but I can't remember. I'd have to revisit.
Because I'm imagining, that's kind of how purpose-led work feels, and like, heart-centered places, like the road keeps rising up to meet you. But I was thinking of it just in like this moment-to-moment way. If you make it really simple, it's like there's certain moments that just have this kind of energy of alignment, like where things are just kind of moving through you. I experience it most readily with public speaking or my work.
Yeah.
In fact, it's why I do my work. And it's funny because I wouldn't call it enjoyable. I wouldn't not call it enjoyable either. I wouldn't say like, oh, what I do is no fun and I don't like it. I would never put any negatives to it, but I wouldn't be like, oh, it's so enjoyable to do what I do.
Right.
But what I do, like it's more enjoyable to talk to you on Bliss and Grit. But what does happen when I work is it feels like singing. It feels like channeling. It feels like this incredible movement through me that has such a rightness to it. It feels so right not to be like caught in my own thought stream, but just to kind of be like open and like receiving the moment and moving with the moment as the moment arises. So I was thinking just on like a very moment to moment level, if you think about flow state, it's like, it's just, where are those places where you feel led and moved? And I don't know what other words he would use. It always feels to me like channeling, just because I don't know how else to describe that something is arising through you without any contrivance.
Yeah. And since I've totally Debbie Downered on athletic pursuits, I would like to say what you're describing, when you see athletes who have accomplished amazing feats, the ultra marathoners or the ones that are really successful, they're coming from enthusiasm. It's because it is for them what is genuinely true for their life. And it's this beautiful thing for whatever reason, which I think will always be a mystery about why any one of us has our different assignments or things that, hit just the right chord and have just the right resonance. But for whatever reason, that person, that, exceptional ultramarathoner, like that's what's right for them. That's what's true for them.
They're finding enthusiasm. It's it's that alignment piece. I would say doing Bliss and Grit hits all three for me, from the sense of like accepting whatever's arising in us, which is not sometimes so easy. It's like, of course, I want to
our last episode when I was just a big lump, and I was a big lump.
And then I hated myself for overcompensating. And it's like, and then, okay, well, that arises. And then we just accept that maybe there's something to offer. It's not, everyone doesn't even have to like it. It's like, maybe they'll learn what not to do. Maybe you'll learn what to do. Maybe it'll invite
or that it's okay to be a lump and it's okay to overcompensate. And so it all happens. Yeah.
We have to keep meeting it, like always, because it's so vulnerable to just talk about yourself a lot. And so to me, there's a lot of acceptance. And then there's enjoyment, because it is fun to me to talk to you. That's a little different than just when I work, because, we talk about very deep stuff when I work. So I wouldn't like label it as like fun times.
And we're friends. So it's a different kind of back and forth. Yeah.
I'm much more involved as Vanessa, the personality, when I'm talking to you. And then there's enthusiasm, because, we literally don't do anything we don't feel like doing. That doesn't feel like aligned.
Right.
And doesn't feel like zing. So that's like the trifecta for me of getting to work with these things with Eckhart Tolle. And of course, in other areas of your life, it may not be so simple, like in relationships, accepting that my parents are a certain way and they feel a certain way and they're saying a certain thing, and then accepting what I feel in response, like all of a sudden I may get into like trickier terrain, and y'all may notice a similar thing, like certain aspects of life. You might find this really workable and like really a great practice. And then you might find these little, pie pieces that are trickier, and that's cool. Like accept that. And then, just stay with the awareness of it.
And play. Try it out. I'm really I have found it to be a very curious unfolding in my life when I remind myself of those three things and I'm noticing a moment and I'm like, well, which, it's pretty fascinating. It's good times.
Okay. Let us know how it goes.
Thank you so much for listening to today's show. The show notes, including any of the resources that we mentioned in the conversation, live, as always, at blissandgrit.com. And if you go to the website and scroll down, you're going to see each episode's separate post. The resources are in there. You can also come play with us on Instagram and Facebook. We're Bliss and Grit at both of those spots. And if you want to support the show, you can write us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or on our Facebook page, which is Bliss and Grit. And we have a subscribe form on the website. You can sign up there if you want to hear about what we have brewing for the community. We're going to be running a very small, intimate, online, lovely event starting mid-June. So we're putting together all the details and everything. We'll be sending that out. If you want to be the first people to hear about it, the list is going to be the first shot at getting the news. So we are very, very, very grateful to those of you who have already written reviews. Here's a lovely one that popped up on the Facebook page from Krista Scarvey. I am hooked. Finally, I have found folks that are speaking my language. Thank you, Bliss and Grit, for being so wise, funny, and accessible. It's an absolute joy to feel affirmed in what feels true to me. Wonderful. We're so glad it feels affirming to you and that you're listening with us. We'll be back next week.